Happy Monday, everybody. For those unfamiliar, this is the Psychedelic States of America Monday News Roundup. My name is Jack Gorsline. I'm an investigative reporter, founder of both Psychedelic States of America and the Psychedelic Writers Guild, which we'll be hearing more about very soon. Really excited to jump into a fast-moving show today. We have a really great lineup of two phenomenal guests, both Jay Kopelman, U.S. Marine veteran and CEO of the Mission to Live Foundation, who was heavily involved in the advocacy effort behind a recently filed Senate companion bill tied to the Innovative Centers Therapy Centers for Excellence Act of 2026, soon to be filed Senate companion bill, I should say, as well as a really exciting spot with Will Nelson, Will E. Nelson, if you can believe it, co-founder of Decriminalize Nature Virginia, and one of the driving forces behind the creation of Chesterfield County, Virginia, as recently covered here on the show, a conservative-leaning county just outside of Richmond, Virginia. The capital of Virginia, has just created a plant medicine committee that Will is one of the inaugural members of. So we'll talk a little bit about the coalition building process that's been in the works for a number of years in Virginia and how that might play out amidst a number of evolving policy factors. We'll bring Jay on in just a couple of minutes here, but I am excited to be able to share a number of pretty significant policy developments across the state level, across the U.S. in the last couple of days. The first is a bit of a sour note, which is that New Hampshire, which over the last couple of years has taken a hard swing from the conservative arm of really New England's conservative crown jewel there up just north of Massachusetts. The New Hampshire state legislature has ultimately punted on advancing both psilocybin and cannabis legalization bills. That, again, the fact that as I've touched on previously in shows past, the fact that some of these bills are being filed, especially in New Hampshire, which, if you're not familiar with their particular political climate, leans more on the libertarian arm of the evolving conservative culture here in the U.S. And has always kind of leaned on that particular arm of conservative culture in particular, and conservative political beliefs. So the fact that New Hampshire is taking a really hard swing at not just a medical access framework, but like a personal use legalization for certain qualifying conditions, continues to be something worth tracking in the years ahead. But for now, that bill has fizzled out once again. I think it's the third year that particular personal use for personal use of psilocybin for qualifying conditions legalization framework has fallen short in New Hampshire. So moving on, New Mexico, which I actually am excited to be able to share that I have an article published, coming out tomorrow about all of this, but it broke in Marijuana Moment this morning that New Mexico in particular has designated over $500,000, $630,000 in particular, to the state's inaugural psilocybin, equity treatment fund, in particular to be able to support access to the newly formed New Mexico Medical Psilocybin Program for low-income, poor residents in New Mexico in particular. It is a framework that was certainly ambitious when it was carved out into the New Mexico Medical Psilocybin Act. I've been pretty outspoken previously, and I'm willing to eat my words here live on the air, that I did not view, it likely that the state would pony up any appropriations for the fund in its inaugural year, especially with the Rust rollout. However, as you'll read more about tomorrow, a really remarkable grassroots effort went into pushing back against the state legislature and getting this funding put forth, and the way that it's being funded and given New Mexico's particular bureaucratic structure, and the managing of their significant oil and natural gas reserves through a series of public trusts is really what makes how this program has come together, and the funding that's been appropriated all the more unique and potentially a blueprint to follow in other states. So without further ado, I'm really excited to pivot to learn a little bit more about what's going on here in DC on Capitol Hill. I'm joined by Jay Kopelman, CEO of the Mission to Live Foundation and U.S. Marine veteran. Jay, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so we'll jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background in particular, and what led you to join the team and take the helm of the Mission to Live Foundation, and how your experiences advocating for psychedelics for both for veterans but for general policy reform at the federal level have been shaped by your experiences in your service.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a Marine veteran, 20 years of service, and I retired back in late 2006. Um, Following my service, I was diagnosed with severe PTSD, multiple traumatic brain injuries, and my behavior was quite indicative of that. So, carried a lot of anger, guilt, and self-hate for much of my adult life, and it was at times debilitating. There was one day in particular where my now ex-wife came into the garage and found me sitting against the refrigerator in the garage with a gun in my mouth. Ultimately, she decided that she could no longer be in this marriage with me. She asked me to leave, rightfully so. And that was in 2015. So I languished for another 9 years in this kind of limbo of not knowing exactly what was wrong with me or how to fix it until March of 2024, when I had the opportunity to attend a retreat at the Mission Within under the supervision of Dr. Martine Polanco, where I was able to participate in an Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT retreat that was profound, completely life-changing experience, allowed me to see and understand the reasons why I had behaved the way I had for so long. Particularly in the 5-MeO, it allowed me to just open up my heart and let go of the anger, the hate, the self-hate, and the guilt that I had carried for all those years. Certainly childhood trauma was a big part of that. And then it just becomes exacerbated by trauma that's informed during combat. So, following that retreat, I spoke with friends of mine about the work that was being done and the importance of all of this, and asked them, quite frankly, to consider donating so that we could help others provide this type of healing to them, and had become somewhat friends with Martine by then, and told him I would help him in any way that I could because it was so important. It had such a profound impact for me, a profound positive one, of course. And immediately, my friends committed $1 million to this effort. So several months later, Martine asked me to become the executive director of the foundation, and
Incredible.
that was in December timeframe of 2024. I came on in that role
Mhm.
and have been just pushing toward making this a reality for as many people as possible going forward. We came to becoming involved with the policy side of things in a educational and research informed way uh, almost a year ago, after I met Melissa Lavasani at Psychedelic
Mhm.
Medicine Coalition, and I know you know Melissa well.
Yep.
So attended her federal summit last May. I was moderator for a panel there, and I just think that the work that she started is incredible. To be able to get uh, a bill introduced on the House floor already, and now
Mhm.
we'll see the Senate bill being introduced
Yeah.
shortly. Both have tremendous bipartisan sponsorship, and I think that this legislation that will require the VA health system to research and conduct clinical trials with psychedelic medicines for the veterans for whom other modalities haven't worked, for
Mhm.
treatment resistant depression, traumatic brain injury, post traumatic stress disorder. It it's it's a quantum leap forward,
Yeah.
and it's really going to be super impactful in providing positive outcomes for those who really need it.
Yeah, and I want to rewind a little bit to, the timeline with which you came on board and started getting involved in policy in particular a little bit over a year ago, but roots joining the organization as far back as you said, December 2024. It was a pretty turbulent time for the psychedelic ecosystem, especially here in DC, fresh off of the FDA's rejection of Lykos's MDMA-assisted therapy. A lot of questions about how long the time frame for FDA approval for any psychedelic compound, might be in the distant, might be off in the future, given that significant setback. And then we see this explosion of interest in ibogaine at the turn of the new year last January with Brian Hubbard and former Texas Governor Rick Perry's appearance in the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yep.
From there, it makes sense that experts like Martin Polanco, for those who aren't, might not know, really, I guess you could say one of the godfathers of modern, ibogaine treatment, operating, in a number of capacities, but chiefly as the founder of formerly the Mission Within Foundation, now Mission to Live Foundation, and seen as one of the leading, practitioners at the cutting edge of science and treatment in real time. So to see experts coming to Capitol Hill has been a really interesting, evolution. It's not just the stand-in, fill-in paid lobbyist per se. The Mission to Live put on an event with the PMC and Melissa that Martine was present at back in January. So with that, let's pivot to the legislation itself.
Sure.
You mentioned obviously fast tracking research and access for veterans across the VA, but one of the really interesting things about the innovative, Therapy Centers for Excellence Act, I'm going to get it right as many times as I can on this show, is that it addresses a real need across federal bureaucracy right now in terms of making any, healthcare or mental health care, science related breakthroughs, which is the lack of collaboration and coordination in terms of collecting data with which to build good policy on the back of, if you will. How does the Innovative Therapy Centers for Excellence Act lay out and address that in a way that makes sense to move forward with now at this point in time?
Yeah. So what this act has is guardrails, right? Which is really critical to this, because for so long I think people have said, "Oh, this is just all anecdotal. How do we ensure safety and efficacy?" And so when you propose or bring forth a piece of legislation, you have to ensure that all the appropriate guardrails, so all the safety, all the research, that it's going to be done in the right way. And this requires that you bring in the right people to not only provide these therapies to the trials participants, but that you also have facilitators on the back end who can conduct the appropriate research, who can provide the integration, coaching, and therapy that is so necessary for a positive outcome. This is not a typical drug trial where you give somebody a pill or a capsule or a shot and say, "Okay, thank you for your participation. We're going to run this study now. We'll call you back in a little bit to see how you're doing. There'll be another phase. We'll do it again. We'll see how it goes until we get to a phase 3 trial." But this requires some very specialized care. It's not like you can give somebody psilocybin and put them through like an 8 grams of a psilocybin experience and then send them on their way. It just doesn't happen, right? It requires a long period of time to take the medicine and then to go through the experience. And then on the back end, people have questions, right?
Of course, yeah.
These are very deep experiences that have to be interpreted, and then have, that person has to have somebody they can talk to about the experience who understands trauma-informed psychedelic therapy.
Well, and as many who know anything about the state of psychedelic culture right now, integration and obviously the prep and and setting that goes into it, but really it's the suite of resources and care that goes around psychedelic treatment, especially for veterans and those who are coming to this from that I am seeking mental health related or physical ailment related treatment. It is the hottest topic in psychedelic discourse right now. How do we do that more thoughtfully, especially as there are competing efforts, in drug development to distance the drug from assisted therapy. Compass Pathways is calling it psychological support now. And there's just ample evidence, it seems, that the therapeutic component yields better results. So again, what makes this bill so interesting is that this is the federal government saying these additional components around what comes next for psychedelic care are fundamental to how we build an infrastructure, again, not only at the VA, but across any number of federal bureaucracies, that makes regulated psychedelic care safer, easier to access, and with a base of support from the government to back it up, and again, to provide data in real time, where often there's so much data sharing and bureaucratic logjam because legislation isn't crafted thoughtfully enough to address that before it becomes signed into law. So yeah, and then sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, ultimately safety is paramount, right? That's the number one consideration. And the only way that the government is going to learn about that is from talking to the experts, the people who have been doing this for 20 plus years and who have the experience, the knowledge, and can create the programs that will be needed to be implemented so that we can do this in a safe and effective manner. And it's not going to happen overnight by any stretch of the imagination, but there are people out there. I could name dozens of people who would be well suited to begin building these programs for the government when considering this. And the other thing you brought up, of course, is the pharmaceutical company aspect of all of this. It's like finding a partner who may at some point want to become involved to help design the clinical trials, because it's not an easy thing to do. Especially it's not easy to do this correctly. And so as Lycos found out, right? So that was one of their big stumbling blocks for their program with the FDA. So
even after designing the clinical trials with the FDA's input all the way, it's just something that had never really been done before. Assisted therapy is a component of a novel drug application, and
absolutely.
So how that is addressed through policy reform in particular, rather than pharmaceutical compound approval, through a system that is in existence, right? But I wouldn't say the FDA is the most efficient or effective federal organization that exists. Far from it. So we are closing on time here. I do want to just touch on one of the things that I find most interesting, again, about this piece of legislation is Mission to Live Foundation has also endorsed and supported the Freedom to Heal Act, which comes at psychedelic policy reform and, in general, medical access to psychedelics from a completely different angle, seeking essentially to codify the Right to Try Act that was passed in 2018 and signed into law by President Trump to include Schedule I substances like certain psychedelics. What's notable, again, in the difference is the Innovative Therapies Centers, Therapy Centers for Excellence Act, I butchered it on the last go around, has that framework built in that addresses access and a rollout across a number of different factors, in the VA and otherwise, whereas the Freedom to Heal Act does not have the same thing. And eyeing in particular, and this is what I was working my way around to, the release of a recent Rand Corporation report on the American public's perception of and support for psychedelics or increased access to psychedelics. We're seeing numbers that indicate a lack of familiarity and understanding of very much of anything beyond psilocybin. And we're also seeing people in particular that do support access to psilocybin really preferring, at least right now, that it come through those medical frameworks or retreat center focused frameworks with real oversight and assisted therapy component. I think if you polled the majority of Americans, you might find wider support for the idea of not locking people up for drug use. But as far as what future access looks like and where Congress likely stands, similarly in line with the Rand Corporation's polling, is thoughtful, considerate and measured reform that addresses concerns about getting too far ahead of our skis, if you will, before the American public, let alone federal law enforcement, et cetera, agencies are able to handle the implications of broader reform. So anyways, I ramble, but Jay, any closing thoughts as we wrap up? What comes next, and how can people find out more about the Mission to Live Foundation?
So a couple things real fast.
Yes.
We fully endorse the Innovative Therapy Centers of Excellence Act at Mission to Live Foundation. I'm partnered with Melissa on that. Research is being conducted here at the foundation on retreat participants already. So we are gathering, while it may be subjective because it is survey-based, we are gathering data on 200 participants.
Amazing.
And I will tell you that speaking for the foundation, we do not advocate in any way for just the freewheeling type of legalization of these medicines.
Understood.
It should be legalized only for research and therapy in the proper setting, with the proper guidelines and guardrails in place to ensure safety at all steps of the way.
Fair. I appreciate the clarification. And to your point, I noted it earlier, but for further clarification, Mission Within did in fact endorse the Freedom to Heal Act and supported that as well. Want to make sure that we get that firmly on the record. The other thing I wanted before we jump, the Mission to Live Foundation has a really exciting new Ibogaine fund, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have always funded Ibogaine and 5-MeO treatments, but one of our donors just recommitted to that with another $1 million this year.
Incredible.
So our goal is to raise $3 million in 2026 to provide scholarships to veterans and first responders to access psychedelic assisted therapy retreats. And they go to the center that they feel most comfortable with, and then they can apply for a scholarship with us. So our website is missiontolivefoundation.org. And we are all over social media on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and TikTok now.
Amazing. And we'll be sure to put out clips from this interview and share far and wide, as well as include the information how to learn more about the Mission to Live Foundation in the show notes once it's up. So Jay, thank you again so much for joining. To be continued for sure. And thanks for all the incredible work that you do.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thank you for the conversation today.
Yes, sir. All right. We are running a bit behind schedule as always, but there's really no time limit here when you're going live. I'm thrilled to be able to be joined next by one Will E. Nelson, co-founder of Decriminalize Nature Virginia, psychedelic policy reform advocate extraordinaire, at the cutting edge of a number of really exciting reform efforts in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, actually my home state. So Will, thanks so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in psychedelic and or plant medicine advocacy at large. And then we'll dig into a little bit of the history of psychedelic policy reform efforts in Virginia over the last few years.
Sure thing. So I kind of stumbled into all of this. I kicked off a Decriminalize Nature chapter for Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of Virginia, for who doesn't know. And we approached city council. We even had one city council person who was on board, but we weren't getting a lot of luck there. But we continued to do, panel discussions. We taught people how to grow mushrooms. We did workshops on sacred cacti and really just kind of getting the word out there. And that all fast forwards to about, I'd say, late 2021 when the citywide campaign became a statewide campaign.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about taking the jump from city to state. What was the first bill that you were involved in getting filed at the state level, and what has followed since? How has the temperature for psychedelic policy reform in the Virginia State Assembly evolved over the last few years?
Sure thing. So it all kind of started from we had a local group, the Richmond Plant Medicine and Ayahuasca meetup group, and you can kind of think of it as just like an integration circle where people would come in and ask questions. Maybe they had experienced something before and wanted to share it. And we had actually invited a state senator at the time and a state delegate at the time to come out and sit in that circle. And it was fun because no one really knew who they were until they got to them in the circle and they would say, "Hi, I'm Senator so and so." But from hearing the stories just from the group of like 20 people, that ultimately led to them wanting to submit legislation. And that was now Lieutenant Governor Ghazala Hashmi. She was a senator at the
Yeah.
time, and then former delegate Don Adams.
Mhm.
And so they
Well, could you
challenged us
speak up?
together this like virtual conference. We brought researchers in from VCU. We had veterans come in. We had advocates come in. And we gave this presentation and invited the entire General Assembly.
Very
So
cool.
that year, two bills got submitted. It was SB 262, which was you can think of it as it was to decriminalize the possession and use of psilocybin. And instead of it being a felony, you would ultimately just have a civil penalty. And then on the House side, from Don Adams, it was a similar bill, but it also included ayahuasca, iboga, and all of the various
Interesting.
entheogens and plant-based psychedelics.
Gotcha. And so, where do we stand today? What are the bills that are currently up for consideration? I know that there's a really interesting fungi task force bill that's not psychedelic specific, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and get a little bit more info on that from our audience. And then we'll pivot a little bit to the work that you've been doing in Chesterfield County in particular.
Sure thing. So that first year, we weren't able to get a bill even out of committee. We got some audio issues. Let me try going to.
Could you just speak up a little bit?
All right, let me know if you all can hear me better now.
I think that's good. I think that's better.
The second year was SB 932, which is a psilocybin advisory board, and it was would also reschedule psilocybin to Schedule 3. That was probably one of our biggest wins because that actually passed the Senate with bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Got killed immediately in the House, which will be a reoccurring theme. We also had a bill in the House that went up, and that was basically to do kind of like a medical marijuana style program where you would be able to have a doctor's note that would allow you to possess it. The last 3 years we've been running the Veteran Suicide Prevention Act and variations of that, which has passed the Senate, but we continue to get held up in the House of Delegates in Virginia. So that's where psychedelic policy has been.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about some of the other organizations outside of Decriminalize Nature that have been involved? I know that very recently, and I'm looking forward to interviewing them soon, there's been a chapter of Americans for Ibogaine, Virginians for Ibogaine that's cropped up. And I know a number of other organizations that have nationally minded intentions have provided some insight and some support in Virginia. Can you speak to a little bit the other organizations you've been working with?
Sure thing. So over the years, we kind of are the leading force for policy and advocacy work towards psychedelics and plant medicines in Virginia. So we have worked with just about everyone who is also willing to help us get a bill passed. So we've worked with Reason for Hope, We've worked with Navy SEAL Foundation a couple years back on one of the veterans bills. A lot of the VCU researchers, there's UVA researchers, and then some of the national organizations as well have expressed support.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the day-to-day, year-to-year momentum is coming from us.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think one of the things that'll be really interesting to keep an eye on. I talked a little bit about this last week when Double Blind Magazine put out a great article about the influence and state level psychedelic policy reform efforts that Compass Pathways had been involved in, and noted specifically that in Virginia, what we describe in the psychedelic policy world as a trigger bill that was specific to Compass Pathways synthetic crystal polymorph psilocybin compound that's patented and likely to be approved by the FDA at by year's end. That bill would have legalized or rescheduled crystal polymorph psilocybin upon its FDA approval, made it all the way to former Governor Youngkin's desk, where he vetoed it, and notably received some pushback and some scrutiny from Republican lawmakers in the state assembly about concerns that the bill was little more than a big pharma carve-out bill, which, to be fair, it is. So definitely interesting to see the Republican Party in particular push back against the influence of private industry on something like drug policy reform in any event. But I think it speaks to the evolving nature of, I guess, the new Republican right, if you will, and their stance on a broader libertarian perspective on substance use and government interference in people's, personal choices. That said, and speaking of conservatives, to close, Will, tell us a little bit about the Chesterfield County Plant Medicine Committee, and tell us a little bit about your Decrim Nature co-founder, Dr. Mark Miller, I should say, his involvement in the creation of this really exciting new committee in conservative-leaning Chesterfield County.
And I will quickly mention that 2 years of that veteran bill, breakthrough therapies, passed with complete Republican support in the Senate, which is huge.
Yeah.
SB 379, really quick, that has been the new version of that trigger bill, and that took some lobbying with Senator Jennifer Boysko to make it not a crystalline polymorph bill, but a psilocybin trigger bill just in general.
Just blanket,
so,
yeah.
That is up on the docket for the governor to sign at any given point in time.
Very nice.
Since that's kind of gotten out there, that gave Dr. Mark Miller, who before becoming a Chesterfield County Board of Supervisors was actually the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature Virginia, and has been doing a lot of our policy work throughout the years and making connections. And so we established the Chesterfield County Ad Hoc Plant Medicine Committee. And it consists of 18 people. And our job is to, one, take a look at what the state is starting to do and how the county should respond. To two, look at what other municipalities, other states, even other countries are doing around psychedelics and plant medicines to kind of see what's out there is working. And three is to have this public forum and bring in subject matter experts to educate the public and all these folks that sit on the committee.
Yeah, and so one of the interesting threads about the creation of this committee that we've talked about previously offline is the support, or at least acknowledgement, from the Chesterfield County Sheriff's Office, correct? Or the sheriff himself, if I'm not mistaken, that prosecuting people for mushroom use is really not a good amount of, a good spend of resources, if you will, allocation of resources from law enforcement. You talk a little bit about the conversations you've had with local law enforcement in Chesterfield County and how that might have influenced the creation of this committee in particular.
It certainly helped. So mushroom charges are pretty rare in Chesterfield County, and I would argue in most of Virginia in general. It's not what they're out there looking for. Most of the times, when people get busted for any number of substances, mushrooms might be in that lineup of 10 other things. It's never the main cause. Um, we have spoken, it's public now. Members of the committee include the sheriff of Chesterfield County. It includes the behavioral health director of the Chesterfield County Jail. It also includes two folks from the Chesterfield County Police Department.
Wow.
And one of the interesting threads that have kind of come out of that is what they're dealing with first responders, from police to EMS to firefighters, is they're also dealing with a lot of those traumatic stress issues, anxiety that comes from the work that they do. So in one sense, they're actually trying to look at how do we improve the health and well-being of the folks that we actually work with to better serve the community.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen law enforcement and even active duty law enforcement play an interesting and evolving role in policy reform efforts. I want to give a big shout out to Sarko Gregarian, friend of the show and of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP, who has been at the forefront of advocating for access, or at least protected use, of psychedelics for active duty law enforcement, given the number of traumatic experiences, first responders as well. And we've seen policy crafted and research studies crafted, in particular in states like Ohio, where they've dedicated really interesting educational program for first responders that I believe is partnered with MAPS. Where, the evolving influence of active duty law enforcement and first responders, and even healthcare professionals that might be traumatized from their time working in, the trauma ward, the emergency room, et cetera, is not to be discounted as an emerging voice. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Thank you, Philip Blair, for chiming in. So Will, it has been a pleasure as always. Where can we find out more about what's going on with Decriminalize Nature, and where can people learn more about your work in this evolving space?
Sure thing. You look up Decriminalize Nature Virginia, or if you look up psilocybin or magic mushrooms in Virginia, we do pop up some of our news articles about the different bills. We're easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Decrim Nature, the RBA. Anyone wants to reach out directly, so you're from Virginia, we are decrimnatureba@gmail.com. We're out doing events at any given time. Definitely reach out. And these meetings will be open to the public for anyone who's local. Other members include Department of Health and Human Services at the county level. It also includes researchers. It also includes a lot of mental health professionals. But the idea is really, especially being able to work at the local level and actually getting a chance to educate people one-on-one on this, and take them on that journey with us, so that when we do get to the General Assembly, Chesterfield County, as a government, can make a recommendation to all of our senators and delegates on why we need to move forward on this.
Yeah. Definitely worth keeping an eye on. And the latest updates out of that Chesterfield County Ad Hoc Plant Medicine Committee, you will certainly hear first at PSA. Will, thanks so much again for joining. We'll see you soon, I am sure. All right. About 10 minutes over the anticipated time. I think that it's safe to say that an hour-long iteration of the Monday or Friday news roundup is probably in order in the not-so-distant future. And you just want to note, the half-hour, very clippable format of content seems to be in vogue right now, but there's so much happening across the entire psychedelic industry. I think it's one of the most intersectional movements in global politics right now. I think there's so many threads we aren't covering. It's part of the reason that Psychedelic States of America was created. It's part of the reason why this partnership we're building with Psychedelics today is so important. along with so many other partners we're working with in the psychedelic media ecosystem at large. You're going to be hearing a lot more about some new partnerships that we're forging in the days ahead. And I am so excited to share when the time is right. Until then, be sure to tune back in on Friday, a little bit earlier in the day, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, for the Friday News Roundup iteration here at Psychedelic States of America, powered in part by our friends at Psychedelics Today. I'm Jack Gorsline, investigative reporter, founder of PSA and the Psychedelic Writers Guild. Signing off for now. Happy Monday, everybody.